In 2014 or 2015, I tangled with the most demanding, almost unsurvivable client that I ever worked for. It was a pretty good sized job. I remodeled a basement, I built a pavilion, and I removed and replaced a very nice, up off the ground red cedar deck with a hot tub in it. Worked hard, turned out nice. There was a small mistake made in the finish on the deck, and the upshot was this. In order to get away from those people, I had them sign a release and I wrote out a check for $15,000, which was the portion of my contract that was dedicated to that deck. Gave them all the money on the deck back and said, please don't call me again. They didn't, and I'm never going back. This introduces what I think is the most important thing that a young contractor can learn and never forget, and it's this. 80% of your trouble is going to come from 20% of your clients. And so the key to survival and success as a general contractor is to learn how to identify the 20%. So there's a few tricks. No. There are a few, really a small number that I know of, pretty simple things you can do that'll give you a pretty good opportunity of identifying the 20%. And the first is, from the initial phone call, and then to the initial site visit, you pay close attention to how you feel. What is the feeling when you're talking to this person? You are continually asking yourself, do I get the smallest whiff of an entitlement mentality? You know what I mean, right? There's a whole group of people in this world who feel that the world owes them something. In some cases, the world owes them a lot. In some cases, the world owes them everything. If you get the smallest whiff of that, you just politely decline. One of the ways you can identify that is as you are talking to them about what they want and their property and their intention and their vision and what have they considered, you include in the conversation, what kind of work have you had done on this property? Tell me what you've done. Show me the work. Have you done big projects? Have they put in new yards? Have you had new sprinkler systems put in? Who built that swimming pool? What about that fence? Quite a fence. You like the fence. What about your roof? Is your new roof? You ask them about the people who have provided service for them previously. Maybe they're automotive mechanic. You say, hey, I'm looking for a good mechanic. Who does your car work? And you listen carefully to what they say about the other people who have provided services. Now, if they complain about one, all right, sometimes people are substandard. If they complain about two of the people that have done projects for them, okay, but that's a red flag. And if they complain vociferously about three of the people who have done anything at all for them in the context of your initial visit, you've got to walk away, because you're going to find yourself on the same list of being complained about no matter how good a job you do. So now, as a contractor, you're immediately on the hunt for clients, for customers. And there are, different ways to do that. There's lots of conversations, and we have in the Essential Craftsman Academy, you might check that out, it's our subscription group, a video that Nate made about using social media for marketing, and those are important discussions. But one of the ways that I liked the best to identify and make contact with and do work for folks is the concept of mutual acquaintance. And that happens through word of mouth, and word of mouth is the best advertising, but it takes a while. It's like pushing a train, right? You've got to do a lot of good work for quite a while before word of mouth begins to generate consistent work. But word of mouth is the best, and so you can ask people, do you have friends that might enjoy my services? You know, I give discounts for referrals, anything like that, because when you have work that comes through mutual acquaintance, you have a little leverage on each other. You have the leverage on them of having been sent to them because they are a good person, and so they may try to behave like a good person. They have the leverage on you of having engaged with you because you have been recommended as a good person, and so you're going to try harder to treat them right. And so you start out with at least some possibility of playing fair on both sides of the equation. Besides that, you know someone that you can talk to about their background, and you can ask them for some inside baseball. Maybe that's obvious, but it's something to keep in mind. One of the reasons that large contractors succeed is because lots of times large contractors have credit departments. They have people who research the credit rating and the business reputation of the people that approach them, soliciting them to do work, right? I remember I worked for MS Concrete, and they had two guys who were working all the time, Henry Hines in particular. Henry Hines, the working man's friend, some of the guys in the field scornfully referred to him as. I never met Henry, but part of his responsibility was to vet and analyze the creditworthiness of the big people that would come and want MS Concrete to do work for them. MS Concrete prospered because they were almost never paid. Hard for a small guy to do that, but you need to try to find some way to determine whether or not the people that are going to ask you to lend them money by doing work and then hoping they pay, you have to have some idea of whether or not they're going to pay you. So understanding that the big successful players spend a lot of time analyzing the creditworthiness of their clients, find some way to do that. I don't know what it is. I mean, maybe you ask them for their credit score. That takes some moxie. Maybe you just get online and sort of stalk them a little bit and see what the conversations are. But however you do it, it's a good idea to have some idea if these people are people who meet their obligations. Because if they don't meet their obligation to you, you're sunk. So there's another thing, and that is we all have to decide if we want to live as a bottom feeder or as somebody that has a reputation for doing quality, higher end work. Highest end work, maybe, if that's your personality. Now the bottom feeding has to happen. I mean, not everyone is at the top of the economic food chain, right? And everyone needs to have work done, and everyone deserves to have good work done. But you've got to be aware of the fact that there are people who have, I've been one, who have champagne appetites on beer budgets, okay, who have an unreasonable expectation of what a little amount of money will buy. You got to learn to set expectations with these conversations. Even good people can become hostile and combative if you make unreasonable claims, set expectations unreasonably high, and then deliver what you knew you had to deliver for the money, but they were thinking of something else. So pay attention to the expectations of the people that you are going to work for in terms of what their environment shows you their expectations are when you roll up. And then be ready to provide and promise a Timex and not a Rolex. And if they are people who are content with Timex, you're going to be fine. But if they can only afford a Timex and you promised a Rolex, buddy, you're going to have a problem. One of the things that is a psychological deal breaker for us is the rejection of having a bid pushed aside. You just really exert yourself putting together a nice proposal on a nice design, and you give them the bid and the number and you never hear from them again. It feels like a terrible waste of time and effort. Well, you got to get over that. You've got to realize that part of distancing yourself from the 20% is being willing to miss or pass on at least half of the bids that you prepare. Because if you're in the mindset you've got to take everything that comes along, construction is going to be unsurvivable for any number of reasons. So being comfortable with rejection and comfortable with putting enough money into your proposals that you can satisfy these people is a way to satisfy more people, which will reduce that 20%. So keep track of whether or not you are okay with people saying no. There's some apocryphal wisdom that you should never work for attorneys or school teachers. Well, ouch. Some people would say you should never work for preachers also. Well, I kind of reject that clear across the board, except I have to acknowledge that there's unfortunately some truth to it. There's the reality of if you work for an attorney, you're never going to beat them in court. I had a next door neighbor, Jane Neal, a great neighbor and an attorney, and so litigious. And she wanted me to do some work for her. What do? I'm stuck. And I did it. And it went fine because Jane was good people. I miss her. She passed away. She had just a terrible type of a cancer. And she discovered it because one day she was loosening the lid on a jar of pickles and the bones in her forearm broke. Jane and Brian and Cassie were great. The job went great. But in general, you've got to be aware that if you work for an attorney, you're never going to win the fight. And so you've got to make sure that you're not going to have to fight. School teachers. Some of my favorite people in the world are school teachers. But every job we take, our jobs leave marks on us, right? They scar and they strengthen and they reinforce and they degrade aspects of our characters and our bodies and our personalities. And school teachers quite naturally get into the habit of teaching. If you're teaching, the baseline assumption is that you know more than the person you're talking to. And so I had a job, I had worked for a client, Art John's one of the finest men I know, and a school administrator. I worked for him several times and I loved it every time. Nice projects. John referred me to an acquaintance who was another school administrator. I took the job. It was one of the most stressful things I ever endured, and I got out of there with my skin, and it was two big jobs, and I made it. But the fellow was a school administrator to the bone, and I always felt like I was sitting in the principal's office. And when I look back, I realized that was a close call. I've worked for friends from church. I've worked for people, I've worked for my bishops in the past. And it went well. They were good men. But you have to be aware that just because someone claims or pretends to be a God-fearing person does not mean they will not steal from you. I was on a job in Las Vegas, and there was a pastor who was the project manager for somebody, and he was the most strenuous, demanding, unreasonable person I'd ever worked for at that point. Now, he has been eclipsed since then, but you got to be careful. Stereotypes are dangerous. Stereotypes also inform us. Bottom line is this. You roll in, you roll up, you talk to them, even on the phone, you're going to get a vibe. And it's easier to survive being short of work than it is to be unpaid. Do everything you can to stay away from the 20%. And then break a leg, figuratively speaking, to do the best work you can for every one of the 80%. And you're going to enjoy life as a general contractor. But brother, you got to pay attention. Thanks for watching Essential Craftsman. Keep up the good work.